Let's jump to that before I move on in this video. Let me just show you this. See here? This was something that we were questioning when we were adding up this stuff about the key cycles. So was it an actual key you stick in the ignition and you turn the key? And here's our answer, because this is Karen's actual car in the evidence exhibits. It's actually a toggle button. So you press it once to turn the car on, then you press it again to turn the car off. And so all that other crap that Trooper Paul came up with, Trooper Dunning-Krieger, he was trying to confuse the issue between a turnkey and a toggle switch like this. And also Grant Smith Ellis also tried to tell us that by toggling that switch on and off repeatedly, that it would reset the entire car system, and that's not true either. If you press that button on and off, it'll actually reset your fob, your key fob. So the external key, instead of actually having a turn type key, you've got a fob that you put on your key ring, and it's got a button on it to lock and unlock the car. That's what it does. If you press that button repeatedly, it resets your key fob. So if you lose your key fob, you can go buy another key fob, and then you can press that button repeatedly and it will reset the new key fob to that car. Essentially, it's how you program your key fob, pressing that button on and off. It actually does nothing else other than reprogram a key fob. Next thing I wanted to cover, just some extra information that pretty much confirms, like, it's not just him saying this. There's actually a lot of different companies who deal in forensic engineering that are saying the same thing. Can the module or the reports be altered? No, they can't. This one's referring specifically to the Bosch, and the reason I looked up Bosch info is because that dude was just talking about the tech stream directly from Toyota, whereas we hear from Trooper Guarino, I think it was, said that he didn't actually say what they used, but the report ends up being in this format, and it does have a Bosch logo at the top. I'll show you all that in a minute. Essentially, what this is saying is that no, you can't edit it. You cannot edit the data, but what you can do is export it to a CSV file or an Excel file, and you can edit that data. But it will no longer match the original data that you pulled. So there's two things that were entered into evidence, okay? The one that we saw on the screen was Excel, but we did actually get the CDRX download from the Bosch equipment. So I'm going to show that to you. It wasn't shown to the jury, so we didn't see it put up on the screen. It was just, if you go right back to the start, I showed you where I got these exhibits from. So not all the exhibits were put on the screen. Some exhibits were simply just given to the jury and not put on the screen. So, Teresa, would I do that? I think I am. I think I'm actually proving that they did here. As he was saying in the text stream data, if you wanted to export a PDF of that CRX file in TSC for the text stream file, you literally have to have that file in the same folder when you're trying to do the export to prove that that's the data that you're pulling it from. So it's the same with the Sallyport camera software that Abby was showing us. Exactly the same. You need to have the original native file there to be able to do any export. But once you've done that export, well, you can edit the export. It just ain't going to match the original native file anymore. So there's that. Now, the next thing I wanted to brush on is this point here. This is pretty commonly known, but apparently there's a lot of people out here who don't know it. So let's just hit that one. If you are going forwards in the car and you hit something at the front end of your car, the car stops, but your body keeps moving forward. So the airbag is to prevent that forward movement of your body from hitting the dash or the steering wheel. But if you're going backwards and then you hit something going in reverse, then your body is still going backwards. What's cushioning your body, then it's the back headrest and the cushioning of your seat. So you don't need the airbag for a reverse collision. It's not necessary. You already got a headrest that catches your head and hopefully saves you from some whiplash. But that's why the airbags don't deploy in reverse collisions. It's not all reverse collisions, but in just standard straight on or hitting light objects, maybe reverse it into a pole, perhaps something like that. That might trigger because it's a lot harder object, but generally just an animal or a person or a soft object, it won't trigger the airbag. You might run over, your kid's bike when you're reversing out the driveway. That won't trigger an airbag event. And that's because setting off the airbag is, first of all, a waste of money because you've got to actually go and get it reset again, right? Costs a lot of money to get them reset. So there's a reason that they don't trigger in events where you don't need them, essentially. But there are other events where you don't need them. That's not the only event, but I just wanted to make it clear that a reverse collision would not set off the airbags. So Trooper Paul going to the airbag system looking for events and saying there were no events there kind of makes sense that there were no events there because it wouldn't have triggered an event. I kind of think that if it were the velocity that he says she was traveling, there would have been a triggered event. So under a certain speed and under a certain amount of impact isn't going to trigger it, but the speed he's saying and the amount of impact he's suggesting should have triggered it. So yeah, it's weird. It's weird. Yes, they all come standard with the backup sensors, but as we were saying previously with the backup sensors, her model was just a little prior to the models where it would trigger the camera to take snapshots of what's going on with that event. So she does have the backup sensors, which essentially will cut the engine if there's something behind the car. But the extra feature of taking a snapshot of what's behind the car is a little bit more a later model. So, but I didn't establish exactly how much later a model. I did establish it doesn't have it, but I don't know when it came about for Lexus, but I wasn't able to establish that part. So other times when the airbags may not deploy based on, algorithms. So what I found out in researching all of this is that America has like these standards, and these certain standards have to always be met for that particular safety system, be it the airbags or the recording of the events. They have to meet those standards, or the car doesn't meet being allowed to be sold by that company, if that makes sense. Were you confused? I'm confused. Is her car designed like that? If you back up and it beeps, it shuts the car down before hitting. Yes, her car is designed like that. But there's one feature that her car doesn't have, and that's the snapshot of what's going on behind the car when those events are triggered. But yes, her car does have it, which is why I'm saying it's a Commonwealth is claiming a system-wide failure, because that infotainment system that takes that trigger, that takes that picture from the trigger, it's a separate chip system to the airbag chip, which is a different system again to the chip that the mechanic plugs into. These are all separate systems. So for any of those other systems to not trigger that hitting something in reverse event, the whole lot had to be down. What other scenarios where the algorithm is told not to trigger an airbag event, an airbag deployment? They are highly complex, I'm sure they are. However, based on my investigation and experience, so we are talking about another forensic technician here. I have listed down some crash scenarios where the airbag may not deploy. So the lighter the collided object, the lower the chance of an airbag deployment. So, for example, an impact with a pedestrian is less likely than an impact with a tree or a pole. because one's like a sudden stop and thud, whereas the pedestrian collision is not a sudden stop. Although there are some, like I said, some vehicles have that extra airbags at the front where the wipers are. That should make one unless there's a problem with the system. So airbags rarely deploy in pure rollover crashes. This is because a rollover does not create the required deceleration. However, considering the unpredictability of rollover accidents, airbag deployment is observed in some rare cases. But a frontal or side airbag will not help much in a rollover. Wearing a seatbelt is the best way to protect yourself from injuries in a rollover. Airbag deployment is not guaranteed in crashes with multiple small objects. In such crashes, the ACU, Airbag Control Unit, measures the severity and direction of each collision. The airbag will only be deployed if one of the collisions is severe enough to cross the threshold value, whatever is set, pre-programmed into that ACU. So you may have a crash where your car impacts multiple breakaway poles, but the airbags did not deploy. So that might be those bendy poles on the side of the road that are designed for you to run over them. So you might hit multiple of those and it might not deploy your airbags because those bendy poles aren't going to destroy your car. It's not a life or death situation. They're going to stop your car suddenly and make your head hit anything. So that's that example. My backup camera gets covered by snow and grime when it snows or rains. Does that stop it from working? That's an interesting question. Does it actually stop it from working or recording or showing you that you are reversing? Or does it just show you snow? Does it still continue to function, but all you can see is snow and grime? What was the last one? An airbag may not deploy in under-road crashes. Crashes in which your car goes under a truck. Airbag deployment depends on the structure of the truck, the presence of under-road protection bars, the speed of the car. Airbags will not deploy if the car is hit from behind. Airbag deployment is not guaranteed an impact with animals or if an object falls on the vehicle. Now, the reasons that they give for all of this is because airbags can actually be more dangerous than the little scuffle that you're in. So airbags can actually kill people. So you need to be in a life or death situation for them to deploy. And the other reason is it's very expensive to get your airbags repacked. I'm not sure what they call that, but yeah, this is a very expensive procedure. Okay, so we can have a look now just at the rest of the exhibits of Karen's car. Right, the picture's not good. So when there's snow and grime on it, it still works, but the picture's not great. Right. All right, what else have we got here? Okay, let's start from the top just so you can see. This is what Trooper Paul showed us with, the incident. And you can quite clearly see here, turn your head to the side. There is no date and time column. Where is it, Trooper Paul? And even if this is pulled from a separate table, it should actually relate, like I said, through an ID, table ID, to the date and time in this same VCH. So the fact that he's got VCH here as part of this table tells me that these actually did come from the Toyota tech stream, and he did say tech stream multiple times. So I'm pretty sure that that's what he's saying this all came from in the tech stream. Again, there's no dates, no times, no ID number to say that this matches which data in the tech stream. None of that there. Here's the VCH time. So this is the time elapsed, but not the date column. Where's the time and date, Trooper Paul? So this here is where everything, all those units are stored. So the ACU, the E, the R, they're all stored in behind all of this. Obviously the infotainment system, the start and stop button, it's not a turn key. What have they done here? They have pulled the console. I don't know which way that goes. They've pulled the console out. See, I can see the cherry wood there. So I think we're at the back looking forward. Look, power off. So that's this part. There's those 4 buttons. So it looks like they've pulled this here off. Maybe. There's the 4 buttons. Yeah, that's actually the ignition. They've pulled this off. That's the ignition. Isn't that interesting? Because that rumor that Grant Ellis Smith spread around. So before this actually got published for anyone to look at, he knew that they were looking at the ignition switch like this. So how did you know that, Grant? Did you somehow get leaked some information before anybody else did? So this is the dash. Yeah, see, that was the ignition. Why did they pull the ignition switch out? Is there a chip on it? Nope. It's weird. I don't know. It seems like they just wanted to dismantle the car for the fun of it. So they pulled all the dash out up here so that they could pull the infotainment system chips out. Let's just destroy her car. This here is the infotainment system by Pioneer. So there we go. Complete destruction. Alright, so let's do the full Bosch reports now. That's all that's left. So let's try that. Okie dokie. Alright, so over here on the left is Karen's vehicle data. Over here on the right is another, it's a 2014 report. So it's an older model and it's older software. But they're both using the Bosch crash data retrieval system. I'll show you a little video on what that actually is. But it's essentially, it's a set of cables with a specific type of plug on the end, and you plug it into the ACU port. So this one here, I don't know how they retrieved it, but over here, Trooper Paul actually wrote through the DLC port. So the guys that we were listening to just earlier said that there was different ways that you could access different parts through the DLC port. And then there's the OBD2 port. So he's actually done it through the more modern port, let's say. Whereas, because this is an older report, I'm going to hazard a guess this is the OBD2 port. So that might account for some of the differences as well. So first of all, we can see that the newer version of the software gives us some extra bits and pieces that this file information doesn't. But something else I would note here, see in the comments section, no airbags deployed, damage to the right rear, seatbelts, no sign of operating usage or non-usage, OEM type. These are things that should be actually in the report. In the older software they are, but in the newer software they're not. How does he know any of those things if this report didn't return anything? How does he know? This is really, really weird. You get to see them over here. All of those things are in a table. So let's go through. This is explaining. I will go through some of the limitations and how it's recording the data, because it does sort of like give us the way to understand how the hex data is laid out, and the differences between the two types of software, the older software and the newer software. But here we see this table here is like the data element sign convention. So I match it up here, the data element sign convention. So if it has a negative or a positive in front of it, it's so if it's a positive, it says going forward. If it's a negative, it says going backwards. your delta V is longitudinally going forward or longitudinally going backwards. So it's a left to right if it's a plus, or it's a right to left if it's a minus. So that's just telling you how to read your data, essentially. So the newer software has a few more extra things. It's got yaw rate, steering input, a couple of the extra things there that they don't have on the older software. So this is showing us that this is a newer version and this is an older version. So our revision 22 and this is revision 33. So this is later version. So we can also see that this was printed on Wednesday, May the 10th, 2023. So here's the thing. The car was not dismantled and the chip off had not occurred because this report couldn't be generated unless that car was actually functional. We heard the guy, the engineer, say that the car literally has to be able to be turned on and functional to get these reports. So the chip off happened after this date. This is nowhere near when the accident happened and they had pinned it on the girl. So interesting, right? I'm sure people have already noticed that before. Probably flogging a dead horse there, but anyway, just showing you that the paperwork supports that. All right, so on the left here is the entire freaking report on Karen's car, right? This is everything, everything. And I'm calling BS. Okay, so first of all, complete file recorded, yes. So in the old one, it would say recording status, all pages complete. All right. If it wasn't complete, that would be saying no, and that would be saying incomplete. Right. The freeze signal off, and the factor is none because it's off. But I'll come back to that because that's also interesting. Part of whether or not data could be overwritten is on the freeze signal based on that hardware setting, basically. Diagnostic trouble codes exist. See, is there any diagnostic trouble codes? It says no. This one says diagnostic trouble codes. It says no. So that tells me, even though this one's got a crash event, that the other chips that the other dude was talking about, the other chips didn't trigger an event, basically. There was no diagnostic events triggered. So that's interesting. Ignition cycle, download times. It says it's been downloaded 1,135 times. That's an interesting number, Gracie, if you haven't noticed that. I'm sure you did, but most recent, let's just try and find ignition cycle over here in the older system. Ignition. Okay, the ignition cycle since, so that's the same value, number of times, 0. So the old system has it under a different table called DTCs, present at start of event. Whereas over here, we're seeing that in the system status at time of retrieval. But yeah, back to, hang on, let's come back to this. Oops, I went too far. What else is on here? Time of event, not NA, time event, NA, previous crash, 0, latest pre-crash page, 0, contains unlinked pre-crash data, no. So any failures that happened with this system, they should have been here. They should have been recorded here. There should have been some unlinked pre-crash data, for example, or a latest pre-crash page. There is a ding on the back of that car that I think Defence was alluring to having happened at another time. And then events recorded, none, NA, NA, NA. That's it. That's Karen's entire data. But when you look at the older system, you get, even when it's NA, you're still getting a listing for it. So this one here, like nothing should have been listed for that because it's not commanded, not commanded, not available, not available. Well, if it's a case of that's not there and it just drops the table rather than giving us a list, wouldn't it have done that? So that seems sus to me. If the old system's doing it, why isn't the new system doing it? So it could be just a change in system, but I don't think so. We've also got system status at event. Understandably, this won't have one because there were no events, or so they would have us think. But in that event, you would think that table would still get printed off. It would be incomplete, or it would be 0. Do you get what I'm saying? Like they would be there, but not the same values if there was a crash. So did the driver have their buckle up? Yes, they did. Did the passenger? No, the passenger was unbuckled. Well, how did Trooper Paul know if there's no more tables here? How did Trooper Paul know? How did Trooper Paul know that there was no seatbelt signs of seatbelt usage? The data should have told him that. So what's he doing? Speculating? I don't know how he knows that because the data didn't tell him anything about seatbelts. There's nothing in here about seatbelts, whether they were on or off. It ends here. That's the end of the data. What's after that is, this is the raw data. This is how it looks before it's turned into human readable format. So it doesn't matter if it's being read by the Bosch tool or if it's being read by the Toyota tool. Either way, this is what's stored in there. It's hexadecimal values, essentially, which convert into human readable format like this. So yeah, so time from the previous TRG, back to the context, the most recent frontal event, TRG1. So where are we? TRG count 1. So it's referring to that one event. See, this is where you actually do need to be a forensic person to tell what the hell this stuff is saying. Seat position pulled back. Shift position, it was in drive. So how does Trooper Paul get all this other information from basically this blankness? He doesn't know if it was in drive. He doesn't know what the shift position is because it's not recorded here. These values here were all not completely filled out. Oops. That's not what we were after. Pre-crash data, -5 to 0 seconds. So up to 5 seconds before that event. So brake switch off, 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 all the way up to the actual event and it's on. Accelerator rate leading up to the actual event. Looks like the accelerator kind of changed a bit and then dropped off. Engine RPM stayed the same until the actual event. Pre-crash data status, valid. Why wouldn't we have a pre-crash data status of invalid over here? Seems like there's a lot of shit missing from over there that really should be there. Let's go to the hexadecimal data for this report here. That's like very complete report. All right, so these are all your PIDs, but we'll just ignore that and go to the EEPROM data. So that's the EEPROM data in the old report. And then we go over here to the EEPROM data in Karen's report. Look at all these zeros. And not all of them are zeros. Some of them are different shapes to others. So some are zeros and some are O's, like an actual O. That's weird. right? So I don't know what's going on with that shit. All right? If this is Trooper Paul going, yeah, I don't want any values in there, then I could probably actually go through these and find out which ones are O, which ones are 0, and tell you how many values were actually changed here. But if you look over here on the old report, instead of just being zeros for no data, it's showing a hyphen. So each field is 2 values. But rather than having, because zeros are actually a value in hexadecimal, rather than doing this is all representing a value rather than nothing was recorded. This seems strange to me. This seems really odd to me. And then actual letter O instead of a 0 in a lot of these columns, that's weird to me as well. If these are meant to be numbers, then they're going to be printed as numbers, and I'm going to confuse a 0 with an O. Only a human does that. That's weird to me as well. And then I did try to actually get some kind of human readable format out of this to see if it matches what's written in the report. But the problem with it is you can't, because you actually need the code to decipher it. Basically, just say no to hex. So I did actually ask the AI to analyze it for me and see what they could figure out. And the AI said, "No, I need the keys to this vehicle to tell you what it's saying." 0 spelled not guilty. I'll allow it. So interesting, right? That's all the stuff I found. The Lexus is talking to me. I don't know what the hell it's saying, but it's telling me stuff. It's telling me like something's going on. I don't know what. I don't know why. But yeah, weird stuff, guys. Weird stuff. So otherwise, these are actually identical reports outside of, those things. So here's Trooper Paul's spreadsheet. All these pretty colors gave it away that it was actually a spreadsheet. So with his key cycle column, his date lapsed, obviously know actually when this happened, and the odometer mileage. So yeah, it's his cherry picked table. Weird stuff, guys. Weird stuff. Patty Cake says, anyone in tech knows 0 can't be confused for O. That's lazy programming if someone did that intentionally. If no data was recorded, it should be a null. Exactly. 6F could mean key off or ABS sensor on. There's no way to know unless we know what those fields. We need the algorithm to know what those fields relate to. So even the AI couldn't work it out without that algorithm. So it's kind of like it's like encryption, basically. With if you haven't got the key for your encryption, then you can't unencrypt it. It's that kind of deal. You could just make it say it the easy way and say it's encrypted. The same way that I found the chip models throughout the documents. Okay, I can pull the document up, but I don't want to have to waste everybody's time looking for it. But I did find the chip number. So you know how he said there's a third chip. Bada boom, bada bing. This third chip's going to give them multitudes more information. There's like 3 lunch boxes, and each lunchbox has got a motherboard in it, and each board has got a chip on it. So there's 3 chips. Right, the CMOS is just the firmware. So what's not going to be in the CMOS chip? There's not going to be any timestamps of Karen doing anything, or the car operating, or the infotainment system being turned on or off, or there's not going to be any GPS in there because we got some tech heads in the room, and I'm a little bit behind on this sort of technology. We can work through this one together. So this is a simultaneous read-write flash memory. 64, 8, and 16, that all basically fall under this model number, essentially. So what I think it could have, if it's going to have anything, it might have an EEPROM, right? So the CMOS might have an EEPROM in it. Or am I talking over everyone's heads now? Do you peel off a chip and read it with a random reader? So you got to actually push. If you take a chip off the board and it's no longer got power and all the other features of the board to run it, you need to plug it into a breadboard. I actually showed these last time. Let me find you a breadboard. It looked like this, and then you can actually see where the red stripe is on these. You could attach power and run those chips, but essentially that there is a chip pushed into different teeth of that breadboard. They're all chips push or bits of wire shoved into the breadboard. So if you want to feed power to one, then you would go like on that style of chip. Pin 1 would have to go on a red line to get power, essentially. That's how you would power up a chip if it was not attached to a motherboard, essentially. I mean, that's just one style of breadboard. That's right, ball grid array. Right. It's just a different type of breadboard, I think, for a BGA. Let me look it up. BGA breadboard. Is that what we'd call it? That's what a ball grid array one looks like. So the difference for those who aren't following us. So see these chips. See these ones have got legs, and they can stick into the breadboard holes. Whereas a ball grid array is a grid of little blobs of little blobs of solder, essentially. And then you got to match those little blobs up with a spot on the board. So that's your breadboard that these legs poke into, and that one's your ball grid array that these balls of solder match up. Just so you knew what we're talking about. Libra, I'm not a techie, so what's the difference between a motherboard and a breadboard? Well, the breadboard is the temporary thing that you're testing it on. The motherboard is the permanent green thing with, so let me show you. Whoops, let me go back to this page. So it's like the mothership out on the ocean that all the little boats hang off of, if that makes sense. It's got all the tracks, they're all connected up, they're all permanent. Power comes in like one direction and everything gets lit up by it. A breadboard is a testing bed. So if I've got this gate and that gate and plug that into power and wire these up, does that all work? Stick it onto my motherboard, test it all. Yep, that all works. Now you just create that circuitry on the board. So testing and actually a PCB, basically. A motherboard's PCB. Make sense?